For 15 years as a state prosecutor, I had spent my career putting criminals behind bars. Drug traffickers, fraud rings, violent offenders. I'd stared into the eyes of people capable of destroying entire families for money, and I never flinched. But nothing in those 15 years prepared me for the voicemail waiting on my phone at exactly 3:11 a.m. The notification lit up my bedroom like a warning flare. Missed call. Mom, 3 a.m. Then a voicemail. I pressed play. Static crackled for a second before I heard my mother's trembling voice. Evelyn, if you hear this, don't call Melissa. She stopped to catch her breath. They locked me in the basement. They keep saying I'm confused. They're trying to make me sign everything before morning. A loud bang echoed in the background. Then my brother-in-law's voice. Time's up. The recording ended. For a long second, I couldn't move. My mother never panicked. She had raised 2 daughters by herself after my father died, survived breast cancer, and rebuilt our family from nothing. She wasn't the kind of woman who cried for help. If she left that voicemail, she believed she might never get another chance. I threw on yesterday's jeans, grabbed my prosecutor's credentials, and raced toward my car. The empty streets of Columbus blurred beneath the headlights as I sped toward the sheriff's office. During the drive, my younger sister Melissa called 6 times. I ignored every call. Then she sent a text. Mom completely lost control tonight. She attacked Eric with a knife. The deputies are taking her for a psychiatric evaluation. Please don't make this harder. I didn't answer. Instead, I called the sheriff's dispatcher. My name is Evelyn Carter. Now, I'm requesting that no psychiatric commitment paperwork be processed until I arrive. Tell the responding deputies I'll be there in 15 minutes. The dispatcher hesitated. I'll notify them. When I arrived at the sheriff's office, Melissa was already there. Her mascara had been smeared just enough to look convincing. Eric sat beside her with a small bandage wrapped around his left hand. The injury looked almost too perfect. Melissa spotted me immediately and rushed over. Oh, thank God you're here, she sobbed. Mom completely snapped. She kept screaming that we were stealing from her. Then she grabbed a kitchen knife and came after Eric. I didn't respond. I looked past her. My mother sat alone in a plastic chair near the booking area. She wasn't screaming. She wasn't crying. She simply stared at the floor, exhausted. The deputy on duty approached me holding a clipboard. Your mother appears disoriented, he explained. We're preparing emergency psychiatric paperwork. Your sister says she's been showing signs of dementia for months. Months? That was interesting. I had dinner with Mom just 9 days earlier. She balanced her checkbook without glasses, beat me twice at Scrabble, and corrected a mistake in my tax return. There was nothing remotely wrong with her memory. Something wasn't adding up. I walked straight to the deputy. I'm requesting that all questioning stop immediately. And that I said calmly. He frowned. This is a family matter, ma'am. It stopped being a family matter the moment someone mentioned involuntary commitment. He shifted uncomfortably. Melissa stepped between us. Evelyn, you're overreacting. I ignored her. Instead, I opened my wallet and placed my prosecutor's credentials on the counter. I'm not here as anyone's sister, I said quietly. I'm here as an officer of the court. The deputy's expression changed instantly. I want every statement recorded from this point forward, I continued. No medical commitment paperwork gets signed until legal counsel is present. The room fell silent. Melissa's confident smile disappeared. For the first time that night, she looked nervous. I walked toward my mother. She slowly raised her head as I knelt beside her. Without saying a word, she reached for my hand. As she did, the sleeve of her cardigan slid back. My heart nearly stopped. Dark purple bruises circled both of her wrists. Not scratches, not accidental bumps. Perfect circles, as though something had been wrapped tightly around them for days. I looked up at Melissa. She quickly stepped backward, and in that single moment, I stopped believing this was a false accusation. I started believing it was something far worse. The emergency physician didn't waste time. Within minutes of seeing the bruises, he ordered a full trauma examination instead of the routine psychiatric evaluation Melissa had insisted my mother needed. I stood beside the hospital bed while nurses connected IV fluids and heart monitors. Mom looked pale, far too pale. The doctor studied her chart before looking directly at me. When was the last time she took her blood pressure medication? I don't know, I admitted. She manages it herself. He frowned. Based on her blood work, he paused, I'd say she hasn't had any of it for at least 4 days. My stomach tightened. 4 days? That wasn't possible. Mom never missed her medication, not once in the last 10 years. The doctor continued reading the results. She's also severely dehydrated. He gently rolled up the sleeves on both of her arms. The bruises looked even worse under the bright examination lights. He examined them carefully without speaking. Finally, he sighed. These weren't caused tonight. What do you mean? They're several days old. He pointed toward the dark rings around her wrists. These compression marks are consistent with someone being restrained for an extended period. The room suddenly felt colder. My mother wasn't attacked tonight. She had been suffering long before anyone called 911. The doctor lowered his voice. I've already contacted Adult Protective Services. I nodded slowly. So have I. When the nurses stepped outside, I pulled my chair closer to Mom's bed. She stared at the ceiling for several seconds before finally speaking. They said no one would believe me. I squeezed her hand. I'm here now. Tears welled in her eyes. They moved me into the basement last week. My heart skipped. They said the upstairs was too dangerous for me. She shook her head weakly. It wasn't for my safety. Her voice cracked. It was so nobody could hear me. I stayed silent. Every word mattered now. They locked the door from the outside. They brought food once a day. If I refused to sign the papers? She closed her eyes. They skipped the next meal. A wave of anger surged through me. What papers? I don't know. They kept covering the first page. They only pointed where they wanted me to sign. She looked at me with terrified eyes. When I refused, they said they'd tell everyone I had dementia. My phone vibrated. It was my Aunt Sharon. I answered. Evelyn, she said immediately, Melissa told us your mother had another episode. She said she's becoming violent and doesn't recognize anyone. I looked through the hospital window at my mother lying quietly in bed. She recognized everyone. She remembered everything. Melissa had already begun poisoning the family against her. I'll explain everything later, I replied before hanging up. Back inside the room, Mom reached beneath the blanket with trembling fingers. She pulled out a tiny brass key. I hid this before they searched my room. I took it carefully. What does it open? She looked straight into my eyes. The cabinet behind the furnace. They never found it. Inside, she swallowed hard, is the one thing they forgot to destroy. I stared at the small key resting in my palm. If she was right, everything Melissa and Eric had built was about to collapse. I left the hospital just after sunrise. My mother was finally asleep, the IV slowly restoring the strength Melissa and Eric had taken from her over the past week. Before I walked out, she grabbed my wrist. They'll try to get there first. I know, I said. Be careful. Those were the last words she whispered before closing her eyes. 40 minutes later, I pulled into my mother's driveway. The house looked peaceful. Too peaceful. The flower beds were freshly watered. The porch lights were still glowing. Anyone driving past would think a happy family lived there. I knew better. Using Mom's spare key, I unlocked the front door. The stale smell inside hit me immediately. Not dust. Bleach. Someone had cleaned recently. Very recently. I slipped on a pair of latex gloves from my evidence kit and began photographing every room. The living room was spotless. The dining table had been cleared. Family photographs had disappeared from the walls. It looked less like a home and more like a house waiting to be sold. I walked toward the basement door. The moment I reached it, my pulse quickened. A brand new steel latch had been installed on the outside. Not the inside. The outside. Only one purpose existed for a lock like that: keeping someone trapped. I photographed it from every angle before unlocking the door. The basement was cold. Dark. The single light bulb hanging from the ceiling flickered weakly. Against the far wall sat a narrow cot, a thin blanket, a plastic water bottle, a bucket. Nothing else. No television, no books, no personal belongings. This wasn't temporary. Someone had turned the basement into a prison. Near the cot, I noticed deep scratches carved into the wooden support beam. Long, vertical, dozens of them, as if someone had desperately tried to claw their way out. My stomach turned. Mom hadn't exaggerated. She had survived this. Then I remembered the key. The furnace stood in the corner beneath a row of old storage cabinets. One cabinet looked different. Its paint was newer. I inserted the tiny brass key. Click. The lock opened. Inside wasn't jewelry. It wasn't cash. It was a thick accordion folder sealed inside a waterproof plastic bag. I carefully lifted it out. The first document made my breath catch. Mom's original estate plan. Untouched. Signed years ago. Melissa's name wasn't the primary beneficiary. Neither was mine. The estate was to be divided equally. Exactly as Mom had always promised. Underneath it was something even more disturbing. A stack of printed emails. Every one of them was between Eric and a real estate investor. One message read, "Once guardianship is approved, we can close within 72 hours. Another said, "The old woman won't be a problem much longer." My jaw tightened. This wasn't impulsive greed. They had planned every step. I kept reading. Then I found a yellow legal pad. The handwriting belonged to Eric. Across the top of the page were 6 words. How to prove she's incompetent. Below it, a checklist. Hide her medication, cancel doctor's appointments, isolate her from visitors, record confused conversations, force psychiatric evaluation. Every item had a check mark beside it. I stared at the page in disbelief. They hadn't reacted to dementia. They had manufactured it. Suddenly, a car door slammed outside. Voices. Then hurried footsteps on the front porch. Someone was coming into the house. I quietly slipped the folder into my evidence bag. The front door burst open. Melissa's voice echoed through the hallway. "Evelyn!" A second later, Eric shouted, "Search the house!" My grip tightened around the evidence bag. Because they weren't looking for me. They were looking for the folder that could send both of them to prison. "Search the house!" Eric's voice thundered through the hallway. I had only seconds. Sliding the evidence folder beneath my jacket, I quietly stepped into the utility room just as Melissa and Eric stormed downstairs. Melissa froze the moment she saw me. "What are you doing here?" I didn't answer. Instead, I held up the brass key. My mother gave me permission to enter her home. Eric's face hardened. "You had no right to go through our things." "Our things?" I looked around the basement. "My mother bought this house 34 years ago. Neither of you owns a single brick." Melissa folded her arms. "Mom isn't capable of making legal decisions anymore." I smiled. "Interesting. Because the emergency physician who examined her this morning strongly disagrees." The color drained from her face. For the first time, neither of them had a comeback. I walked past them without another word. As I reached the front door, Eric grabbed my arm. "You leave that bag here." I slowly looked down at his hand, then back into his eyes. "Take one more second to think about what you're doing." He hesitated. "I'm a state prosecutor. If you interfere with an active criminal investigation, you'll add obstruction to whatever charges are already coming." His grip disappeared instantly. I walked out without looking back. An hour later, I sat inside the State Financial Crimes Unit. Across the table was Olivia Grant, our senior forensic accountant. She opened the estate folder and carefully examined every document. "Let's start with the banking records," she said. Within minutes, subpoenas were approved. The first transaction history appeared on her monitor. She frowned. "That's odd." "What?" "Your mother's retirement account." She enlarged the screen. $800,000. Gone. I leaned forward. "When?" "Over the past 6 weeks." My pulse quickened. Olivia continued tracing the transfers. The money wasn't wired directly. It moved through a consulting company. Another click. Then into another business. Another click. And finally, she looked up at me. Offshore cryptocurrency exchanges. They hadn't simply stolen the money. They'd buried it. Olivia generated a flowchart showing every transfer. The web stretched across multiple companies. Each one existed only on paper. Shell corporations, created solely to hide stolen assets. Then another alert appeared. "You need to see this." She opened property records. My mother's home had already entered escrow. Closing date, tomorrow morning. "They're selling the house?" I asked. Olivia nodded. "Using electronic guardianship authorization. But Mom never signed it." "I know." She clicked open the document. The electronic signature looked convincing. Until she enlarged it. Tiny digital artifacts surrounded the signature. Copy and paste marks. It wasn't signed. It had been digitally fabricated. My phone rang. It was Detective Marcus Hale. "We executed the search warrant." "What did you find?" "A shredding machine." "So?" "It wasn't empty." My heartbeat accelerated. The blades jammed. "On what?" There was a brief pause. A stack of life insurance policies. I stood up. Whose policies? Marcus's voice became quiet. Your mother's. They increased the payout 3 months ago. Another pause. And guess who the only beneficiaries are? I didn't need him to answer. Melissa? And Eric. The retirement savings. The house. The forged guardianship. The life insurance. This had never been about taking care of my mother. They weren't trying to control her life. They were preparing to profit from her death. Just then, Olivia's computer chimed one more time. A newly recovered email had finished downloading from the financial server. She opened it. The sender was Eric. The recipient, someone listed only as R. The subject line contained 6 chilling words. Everything will be finished this weekend. I looked at Olivia. We're missing someone. She nodded slowly. This isn't just Melissa and Eric anymore. There was another person helping them. And somewhere. That third person had no idea we had just uncovered the first clue leading straight to them. By sunset, our investigation had grown far beyond a family dispute. It was now a full-scale criminal conspiracy. The district attorney signed every warrant I requested without changing a single word. Medical abuse, forgery, financial exploitation, identity fraud, attempted real estate theft. Everything was supported by evidence. But one question still haunted me. How had Melissa convinced deputies that my mother attacked Eric? There had to be proof, or at least something they thought looked like proof. The next morning, 3 sheriff's vehicles rolled quietly into the driveway. Detective Marcus Hale stepped beside me. You ready? I nodded. Let's finish this. The front door swung open before anyone knocked. Melissa stood there wearing an expensive navy suit, as if she had been expecting reporters instead of detectives. Eric appeared behind her. Neither of them looked nervous. That bothered me. People who know they're guilty usually panic. These two looked confident. Marcus handed Melissa the warrant. She skimmed the first page and laughed. This is all because your mother told a few crazy stories? No, I replied calmly. It's because evidence doesn't lie. Her smile never faded. You won't find anything. Officers spread through the house. Every laptop, every phone, every tablet, every external hard drive, every document. Everything was tagged and placed into evidence bags. Eric watched silently, almost amused, as if he already knew none of it mattered. Marcus noticed it too. He's awfully relaxed, I nodded, because he believes the real evidence is gone. Hours later, inside the digital forensics laboratory, specialists began imaging every device. One after another. Nothing. Most files had been professionally deleted. Hard drives wiped, cloud accounts erased, phone histories destroyed. Melissa had planned this well. One examiner removed his glasses inside. They scrubbed almost everything. For a moment, the room fell silent. Then analyst Olivia Grant looked up from a network report. Wait. Everyone turned toward her. This internet router. She zoomed into the activity logs. Kept communicating with another smart device. Marcus frowned. There aren't any security cameras. I know, she continued typing. This isn't a camera. Another click. It's a smart home hub. I stepped beside her. What does it control? She enlarged the device list. Lights, thermostat, door sensors, voice assistant. Then, one more item appeared. Indoor baby monitor. Marcus looked confused. They don't have children. They don't. Olivia nodded slowly, which means they probably forgot it was still connected. My pulse quickened. Can we access it? She smiled. If cloud backup was enabled, her fingers raced across the keyboard. They can't delete what's already stored on the manufacturer's servers. A download bar appeared. 5%, 18%, 42%. Nobody spoke. Every eye remained fixed on the screen. Finally, download complete. Olivia opened the recording. The video quality wasn't perfect, but the audio was crystal clear. The timestamp showed 2:57 a.m. My mother sat tied to a chair in the basement. Melissa stood in front of her holding several documents. You signed today? Melissa said coldly, or nobody feeds you again. My mother quietly shook her head. Eric walked into view carrying a kitchen knife. He carefully pressed the handle into my mother's trembling hand. Then, he wrapped her fingers around it. Marcus whispered, "My God." The recording continued. Eric suddenly pulled his own hand across the blade, a shallow cut just enough to bleed. He smiled. Perfect. Melissa grabbed her phone. I'm calling 911. She rehearsed the panic before dialing. My mother attacked my husband with a knife. She sounded terrified, convincing, completely fake. The room around me went silent. Months of planning, millions of dollars, forged documents, isolation, starvation, every lie captured in a single forgotten recording. Marcus slowly looked toward me. This case is over. I shook my head. No. I stared at Melissa's frozen face on the monitor. This case is finally beginning. Because tomorrow morning, she and Eric wouldn't be walking into another courtroom as victims. They'd be walking in wearing handcuffs. The courtroom was standing room only. News crews crowded the hallway outside. Neighbors, former friends. Even relatives who had believed Melissa's story sat quietly in the back row, avoiding my eyes. They had spent months calling my mother confused, unstable, dangerous. Now they were about to watch the truth unfold. Melissa walked into the courtroom wearing a gray business suit, trying to project confidence. Eric followed behind her. Neither one looked at my mother. For the first time since this nightmare began, she wasn't sitting alone. She sat beside me, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Though the bruises on her wrists had begun to fade, I could still see them. A reminder of everything they had done. The prosecutor began with the financial evidence. Bank transfers, forged guardianship papers, the fake consulting companies. Every dollar stolen from my mother's retirement account was traced step by step until it disappeared into shell businesses controlled by Eric. Then came the medical testimony. The emergency physician explained how dehydration, missed medication, and prolonged restraint couldn't have happened overnight. Adult Protective Services testified that the basement conditions were consistent with unlawful confinement. Melissa's attorney tried to argue that my mother suffered memory loss, that she had become paranoid, that the recordings couldn't tell the entire story. Then the prosecutor smiled. We'd like to introduce Exhibit 42. The courtroom lights dimmed. The forgotten baby monitor recording appeared on the large screen. No one moved. No one even coughed. The recording played exactly as investigators had recovered it. Melissa threatening my mother. Eric placing the knife into her hand. The staged injury, the fake 911 call. Every lie, every crime, captured in their own voices. When the recording ended, the silence inside the courtroom was deafening. Melissa's attorney slowly lowered his head. He didn't ask a single question. He simply sat down. There was nothing left to defend. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. When they returned, everyone stood. The foreperson unfolded the verdict form. We find Melissa Carter guilty. On all counts. Melissa closed her eyes. We find Eric Dawson guilty. On all counts. Eric's shoulders slumped for the first time. The confidence he had carried for months disappeared in an instant. The judge looked directly at both defendants. You exploited an elderly woman for financial gain. You deprived her of medication. You unlawfully confined her. You attempted to steal her entire estate. He paused before continuing. Worst of all, you tried to convince the world she deserved it. The courtroom remained silent. For those reasons, this court sentences Melissa Carter to 20 years in state prison. She gasped. Eric gripped the defense table. And Eric Dawson is sentenced to 12 years for conspiracy, financial exploitation, forgery, unlawful imprisonment, and filing a false police report. The bailiff stepped forward. Handcuffs clicked shut around their wrists. Melissa finally looked at my mother. I'm sorry. It was the first apology she'd offered. My mother simply looked away. Some wounds are too deep for apologies. Over the following months, the court voided every forged document they had created. The fraudulent guardianship was erased. The attempted sale of the house was canceled. Every remaining dollar investigators recovered was returned to my mother's accounts. The shell companies were dissolved. Their assets were seized. Even the relatives who had defended Melissa slowly began calling. Most wanted forgiveness. Some wanted explanations. We gave them neither. My mother sold the old house a few months later. She said she never wanted to walk past that basement door again. Instead, we bought a small cottage overlooking a quiet lake, 3 states away. Every morning, she drank coffee on the porch while watching the sunrise. No locks, no fear, no lies. Sometimes she would smile at me and say, you know, I thought nobody was coming. I always smiled back. I made you a promise when I was little. She looked at me curiously. What promise? I squeezed her hand. That no matter what happened, I'd always come home. And this time, I did.